March Madness has finally kicked off in 2025. I'm recording this right in the middle of the opening weekend. I think it's still the best sporting event of the year. You could argue a few others, but to me, the last part of March is special, no matter how much college basketball I end up watching. March Madness, especially this first weekend, is amazing, so we have kicked off. But I'm not here to talk about college basketball. No longer an expert in college basketball. I just love the tournament like everyone else. But what I am here to talk about is updating our college basketball rankings in the NBA. Every year, right around this time, I update my rankings of what college is best represented in the NBA. So let's just jump right in, update for 2025. As always, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe. We got plenty more content coming. I am just getting started here on this channel. But let's dive right in for 2025. So far this year in the NBA season, and I know we still have a few weeks left, so this number will change slightly. But as of recording this, there have been 555 players that have played in the NBA this season. Now, of those 555 players, 71 didn't go to college. Now, that might seem a little low. I was certainly surprised by that number. A lot of those 71 players make up some of the best players in the NBA. So we hear about a lot of non-college players a lot. In reality, it's still a smaller number, but 71 did not go to college. A majority of those 71 players are international players. In fact, 52 of the 71 are just not from the US and did not go to school in the US. So that's guys like Jokic, like Giannis, Luka. Frankly, a lot of the top players in the NBA, they are international players that did not go to school in the US. We do have a fair amount of international players who played college basketball, so they are included in these rankings. But for players like Jokic, Giannis, Luka, they did not go to college, so they will not be a part of this. But there are also players from the US that just didn't go to college, whether that's guys like Scoot, Jalen Green, others that went into the G League Ignite program, which now doesn't exist. But for a few years, some players went to play for G League Ignite, deciding to skip college, spend their one time in the G League before going into the NBA draft. You have a couple players like the Thompson twins that have done Overtime Elite, other leagues and organizations like that didn't go to college. And then you have LeBron, who was old enough that he was of the era where he just came straight from high school, did not play in college. So 71 players overall did not go to college, whether international or other avenues. But of the remaining 484 players, there are 128 colleges represented. Now, 40 of those schools only have one player represented. And if you look at the top 5 players by points scored for those colleges, you're going to see some notable names. Of course, none more famous than Davidson, Steph Curry, the lone representative for Davidson in the NBA. You have Lehigh with CJ McCollum, Loyola Maryland, is where Santi Aldama went to play. Virginia Tech, surprisingly, only has one player in the NBA. That's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And then Northern Iowa is where AJ Green went to school. So those 5 plus 35 other colleges, they only have one player that has played just any minutes at all in the NBA. So the remaining 88 schools have at least 2 players that have played NBA minutes this year. I'm going to throw up on the screen rankings from 88 to 11. I'm obviously not going to go through each individual school. A couple notable ones. Oklahoma only has 3 players in the NBA. But if you rank all of these schools on this list by points per game, Oklahoma is the highest at 18.3 because they have Trae Young, Austin Reeves, and Buddy Hield. So they might only have 3 players, but 3 solid and in some cases star players in the NBA. But let's get into the top 10. Let's get into the big schools. Most of them you will probably expect, maybe a couple surprises, before we get to the most represented school in the NBA this year. Number 10 is probably the only football school, I would say, in the top 10, and that is Michigan. Michigan has 10 players playing in the NBA this year, most notably Franz Wagner, who's turned into a really good young piece for Orlando. Jordan Poole, those 2 lead the Michigan alum in points this year, but overall a decent group with some other just role players to go along with Franz and Jordan Poole. Number 9 might be a surprise, and that's Arkansas, who comes in with 11 players who have played minutes in the NBA this year. Not a ton of stars on this group. Bobby Portis leads the way in points. Daniel Gafford has been hurt a lot of this year, but he's a really good piece for Dallas. Moses Moody stepped up for the Warriors this year. Isaiah Joe, a nice piece for the Thunder. Mostly role players on this list, but still, 11 coming from Arkansas was a surprise. Number 8 is Baylor, who also comes in with 11 players. There's a big tie for 11 players. I am ranking by total points after that. So Baylor comes in slightly ahead of Arkansas. Keontae George leads Baylor so far this year. He's putting up a lot of points on a not-so-good Utah team, but he showed some promise. You also have some older veterans, Royce O'Neal, Torian Prince, and then some young guys with potential, Jeremy Sohan, Davion Mitchell. I don't know if he's ever going to turn into a big-time piece. I've always loved him ever since he played at Baylor and won a national championship for them. Both him and Jared Butler are represented from that team. Number 7 on this list, also coming in with 11 players, is Gonzaga. Not Gonzaga. I'll throw that out there. Gonzaga with 11 players. This is where we start to get into a nice variety of some maybe borderline stars, along with some solid role players. Sabonis leads this group in points, but you also have Rui Hachimura. You have Jalen Suggs, who is a really good young piece for the Magic before he got hurt this year. Even guys like Andrew Nembhard, Julian Strother, Corey Kispert has put up a good amount of production this year. And then, of course, you have Chet Holmgren, who potentially could be the big star of this group. He's been injured this year. He's been injured a lot to start his NBA career. But if he reaches his potential, he's kind of the big star of this group. So you have him, Sabonis, Jalen Suggs. Now we're starting to get into some really good NBA talent on this list. Number 6 is probably no surprise, and that is Kansas. Some people may have thought they would have been a little bit higher on this list, but they come in at number 6. Christian Brown actually leads in points as of recording this. Andrew Wiggins and Kelly Oubre coming in right behind him. The big name on this list, he's farther down this year, is obviously Joel Embiid. He's been the big star that's come out of Kansas. I think both him and Andrew Wiggins would probably be the most notable names to come out of Kansas the last decade. Embiid obviously hasn't been healthy. Who knows if he will be healthy again. And without him, kind of lacking a big star. Christian Brown, Andrew Wiggins, good pieces, but no big star without Embiid. Number 5, and the last school with 11 players, is USC, who has had the most points accumulated out of all these schools with 11 players. They are led by a couple of veterans, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic. They lead in scoring so far this season. But they also got some really impressive young bigs who have came out recently. Obviously none bigger than Evan Mobley, but also Onyeka Okongwu, been a nice young center for Atlanta. And then, of course, all the way down near the bottom, you have Bronny James, who did go to USC, didn't play a ton, but he is on this list as well. Number 4 is another former Pac-12 school in Arizona. They come in with 12 players so far in the NBA this year. Benedict Mathurin leads them in points. Larry Markkinen just behind him. As similar to some of these schools, not a ton of big stars, but a lot of solid role players and some young pieces. Guys like DeAndre Ayton, Aaron Gordon, even TJ McConnell, who is quietly number 3 in points so far for Arizona this season. Not a big name at the top, but overall a decent amount of depth. They come in with 12 players. Now we get to the big 3, and there's probably not a ton of surprise who's going to come. It's just going to be in what order. And number 3 is UCLA, which has 15 players in the NBA this year. A lot of good scorers have come out of UCLA recently. Zach LaVine, Norman Powell. Then you have some of the veterans, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Love, Drew Holiday, all played at UCLA back in the day. And even some younger pieces from some of the newer UCLA teams, whether it's Jaime Jaquez, Johnny Juzang. Both of them made a nice tournament run a few years ago. So overall, a pretty good group that UCLA has. A lot of older players, like a Westbrook, a Drew Holiday, a Kevin Love, but a couple younger players that have fit in. But UCLA definitely leans a little bit older. Not a ton has come from UCLA in recent years, but still, they come in at number 3 on this list. And then the big 2, the top 2 schools by a wide margins in the NBA this year. Number 2 is Duke. They have 24 players. They are led by a bunch of stars, whether it's Jason Tatum, who leads in points so far this year, but then you have Kyrie Irving, you have a young star in Paolo Banchero, you have the trio from 5 years ago, Zion, RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish on this list, Jalen Johnson, a really good young piece for Atlanta. He unfortunately got hurt earlier this year, but he was in the midst of a breakout season. And that's without mentioning a lot of role players, whether that's Gary Trent, Luke Kennard, Wendell Carter. That's without mentioning a lot of good young players who maybe haven't hit their ceiling yet. A Mark Williams, a Jared McCain, a Derek Lively. Jahlil Okafor even got minutes this season. I'm sure you thought Okafor was long gone, but even he got a few minutes so far this season. Duke has always been one of the best NBA pipelines. You see it here. A good depth of star power role players, young guys. They would be the top of the NBA if it wasn't for the other big school in college basketball. And that's number one on the list, and that is Kentucky. They have a whopping 31 players in the NBA. And those 31, I'm not going to be able to name them all, but SGA, he is far and away number one right now. But they also have Devin Booker, Tyler Hero, De'Aaron Fox, Karl Anthony Towns, Jamal Murray, Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis. The list just goes on and on. There's a reason why Kentucky, for many, many years, has been the school for the NBA. It seems like year after year, they are constantly churning out more players. Even this past season, we had Robin Illingham, we had Reed Shepherd. We'll see if that continues without John Calipari. But as of right now, Kentucky is the school with 31 players. Duke, not too far behind at 24 players, but they are definitely the top two in terms of just quantity in the NBA. The last thing I'll say before we wrap up is if you want to look at quality and not necessarily quantity, you could look at it by which schools have the highest points per game out of all their players. Probably no surprise with all the stars I named, but Kentucky is still number one in this case. But Villanova is actually number two. Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, the whole Villanova squad, they are obviously all very good. So they might not have the numbers, but they are all very high quality players. So they come out number two on this list. Then you have some big schools like North Carolina, Duke, Michigan State, who didn't make our top 10, Florida State, Kansas, USC, Alabama, and Gonzaga round out the top 10. So that's if we want to rank by quality. But again, if we're ranking by quantity, just pure players in the NBA, Kentucky and Duke are the true blue bloods, as everyone knows, in the NBA this season. But we will continue to track this over time because I think there are some schools that I named in the top 10 that have some older players that maybe haven't had as much success recently. And so this will be something to track over time. So if you want to follow along, whether with this or plenty other analysis, we're going to do lots of other fun things on this channel. Plenty more long form content coming. So let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see. Make sure to comment what was surprising. Maybe there was a school that was a little bit higher, a little bit lower than you expected. Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future. But these were the rankings for every college basketball team in the NBA this year. Plenty more to come. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.